They fined me for the smell of bread. Let that sink in. $350,000 because my sourdough smelled too much like well bread. And if that sounds insane to you, imagine opening the envelope on a Tuesday morning and reading it in your kitchen while your starter bubbles in the corner like it didn't just become contraband. I thought it was a prank, a clerical hiccup, a bad dream I could rinse off with coffee. But the longer I stared at the number stamped in block letters, the more the house felt smaller, the road outside quieter, the unknown cars rolling by slower like sharks circling a pier you swore was safe. Let me back up a sec. I'm Evan Hart, 32, the son of a suit and glass Dynasty Hart commercial, the kind of company that slaps its name on downtown skylines and calls it legacy. Except I did the rude American thing and left the inheritance on the table. I bought 5 humble acres in a place called Redwood Crest, the kind of hillside neighborhood that looks like a postcard if you squint and forget about bylaws. And I turned an old barn into a certified, permitted, health department inspected bakery because kneading dough made more sense to me than kneading spreadsheets. Because getting my hands into something honest felt like insurance against becoming a man I wouldn't recognize. Most neighbors waved some bought warm loaves off the porch, and one Ruth Ellison silver-haired funny, the kind of 70-year-old who makes you sit and eat a second croissant for the story she's about to tell, became my Tuesday regular. She'd bring gossip and grief and gratitude in equal measure. She'd say things like, "Your crust is almost as good as my Henry's jokes were," and we'd laugh, and the place felt like a home built on coffee rings and flour dust. Then there was her, the headline inside a body, Margot Vale, 50, always in a black blazer and a bun so tight it looked like a threat. HOA president, former finance something from a company that sank 5 years back. And from what folks whispered, she'd turned neighborhood standards into a private currency. Wrong mailbox shade, 2 inches of lawn, too free, a pickup truck that dared be useful, each infraction a brick on the scale until the scale crushed you. And the first time she toured my kitchen, she wore a face like she'd bitten a lemon that fought back. She ran a phone camera over my permits, my stainless steel, my calendar on the wall, and said the word activities, like I was distilling moonshine in a nursery. I'd read every line of the covenants before buying home businesses allowed with proper licensing. No footnote saying, unless Evan's the one doing it, so I showed her papers stamped in blue and she gave me something colder than... No, she gave me a smile that meant, I write the answers later. And sure enough, 2 weeks pass and a certified packet lands like a grenade. $350,000 for commercial odor pollution, unauthorized vehicles, unapproved business operations pay in 30 days, or we lien on your deed. Yeah, that happened. I'm not proud of it, but I crushed that letter in my fist hard enough to crease my palm like a scar. And Ruth, bless her timing, walked in just then and saw my face. She sat without asking, read the number, and the light left her eyes in a way that made me sit too. Evan, she said, you need to know what she did to my Sam's Workshop noise. Fine after noise, fine. We sold part of the back lot just to breathe. And then came the part that iced my spine, 10 offers to the man who owned my place before me. Each one more aggressive, each no, followed by a neighbor, suddenly swimming in violations. And if you've ever felt the temperature in a room drop without the thermostat moving, you know what the truth did to us in that kitchen? I spread documents across the table like a war map. Original survey from when I closed the map attached to the fine boundaries didn't just wobble, they danced. Lines nudged west where my smoker sat, numbers shaved like a barber with a grudge. And when I held the copy up to the light, I saw ghost text beneath fresh ink, a cut-and-paste job for people who think nobody looks twice. And that's when the decision appeared like a loaf ready to score pay and get quiet, or stand and get loud. I chose flour and fire. I baked a stunt, call it petty, call it prophecy. The justice loaf scales balanced in dough with little bread weights, because if we were going to debate what odor smells like, we might as well discuss what justice tastes like. And I set a table on my lawn and told anyone who drifted close that the fine wasn't just a number. It was a flag planted in our yards, and folks nodded, bought loaves, lowered their voices to confess letters they'd gotten about buying from me at risk of fines. Letters that made decent people feel watched in their own kitchens, and that anger that starts in your ribs and climbs to your throat. It found me. So I called a county surveyor I once did side jobs with in the before times, and he gave me the script. Hire a licensed pro measure, clean overlay deeds, and see who's wearing whose land. Like a stolen coat, easier said than done, because the first 3 surveyors ghosted after I mentioned Redwood Crest, which tells you plenty. But on Tuesday morning, a woman named Carla Benton rolled up in work boots and a no-nonsense ponytail, 20 years in the field, and the patience of a woman who's redrawn more lies than I've baked baguettes. She pointed at my papers and said, "Somebody's math is creative," then set her lasers, walked the markers, cross-checked the county's original plats, and by noon, she was tapping a tablet with a look, "You don't forget, Mr. Hart." She said the corner of Ms. Vale's house, her side patio, and half her 3-car garage are 3 feet 2 inches onto your parcel. 3 feet doesn't sound like a war until you multiply it down a wall and across a foundation and into dollars per square foot. And then you're looking at 800 feet of wrong built on your dime, and the permits showed the house approved in the right spot. And the final inspection documented it exactly where it stands over the line. This wasn't an oops, this was a plan. I wanted to punch the report. I went to knead dough instead because anger burns cleaner when you give it something to rise against. And as I folded the sourdough, I pictured stakes yanked reset 2 feet west, a water line I'd found running from her property under my fence to the street, Maine, without so much as a by your leave easement. My foot. This thing smelled like more than overreach. It smelled like criminal intent dressed in a cardigan. So I got methodical. I pulled HOA minutes, public records, the whole paper trail, and I started to see a pattern you could teach in a seminar. Violations escalate fines. Stack families suffocate. A shell company with a friendly name floats a lifeline at 40 cents on the dollar. Survey maps appear that bless boundary adjustments. The signatures all looped by the same hand who'd signed my fake map precision boundary group. If you can believe that my kitchen became a crime lab, my corkboard a confession. And that's when an unknown number texted me. "She's done this before. You're not the first." And I felt less crazy and more scared at the exact same time. The next move had to be public, not because I wanted theater, but because shadows love one-on-one meetings. So I built a map of Redwood Crest out of cake. Yeah, cake houses in fondant streets, piped in buttercream, raspberry swirls for zoning, and every illegally occupied square foot painted a loud, shameless red. And I invited the whole neighborhood to my yard on Saturday. Come learn what's been done to you. Refreshments provided. And when 40-plus people showed up, I could see the battle lines in their eyes. Some eager, some wary, some folding their arms around their fear like a jacket in bad weather. Friends and neighbors, I said what you're looking at isn't dessert. It's evidence. I walked them through the pattern I showed Carla's overlay. I held up the inspection documents, and the yard went quiet enough to hear the birds second-guessing each note. And that's when Margot arrived, parting the crowd like a tide that had better get out of her way. She called me unwell, called the cake ridiculous, called measurements complex. And the authority in her voice cracked like a plate, and before I could answer, a voice from the back stood up. Maya Brooks, 20-something, sharp suit, a junior attorney who lives 2 blocks over. The kind of person who wins arguments by breathing. She said she'd been pressured into signing a boundary adjustment 2 years ago. She didn't understand. She said she believed me, and that declaration landed like a match in dry straw. People started telling stories out loud, the letter about buying my bread, the fines for a kid's bike, the threats couched as guidance, and Margot kept glancing toward the street like escape had a parking spot. And that's when I cut a square right through her bright red fondant mansion and handed it to Ruth. Symbolism tastes sweeter when it's edible, and I said something I'd been sitting on. I've already mailed copies of this evidence and a recording of your threats to people who investigate crimes that cross state lines, and you could watch the color leave her face in stages. Recordings, she hissed later, are illegal. And I smiled a little because this state is a one-party consent state, which means my kitchen heard me loud enough for both of us. You know what I mean? And 2 days later, we were back in my yard. No cake this time, just a cheap Bluetooth speaker on a folding table, and I pressed play. Her voice telling someone to keep fining me until I sold her voice. Telling a surveyor to make the paper say what she needed it to say. Her voice describing shell companies as solutions for problem families. And the sound that followed wasn't silence. It was shock. Finding its footing, chairs scraped, a mug cracked. Someone whispered, "Oh my God," like a prayer with teeth. I showed a signed return receipt from a federal field office. I'd sent everything 3 days earlier. Wire fraud, mail fraud, forged land records, the whole braided rope. And I showed a CC to the county prosecutor and the state bar. Because when people weaponize paperwork, you hand the paperwork to people who know how to disarm it. And that very night, a special session elected an interim HOA board. Maya quarterbacked it with her jaw set, and by morning, Margot was removed from office, banned from future governance minutes, filed cleanly with signatures you could trace to real hands. The weeks that followed were a blur of paperwork and relief and petty vandalism, an envelope on my porch with a burned photo of the cake and SUV idling at midnight that peeled off when I stepped out with a flashlight. But the big machine spun up fast. Bank accounts frozen. Precision's files hauled into vans. Victims interviewed in neighboring communities where the same playbook had been run with different street names, and when the civil judge saw Carla's overlays and the permit to inspection mismatch, he didn't need caffeine, he ordered restitution, he ordered sales of assets, he ordered the yellow tape that went around Margot's front gate like ivy reclaiming stone. I won't lie, watching agents carry boxes down a driveway that once towered over me like a cathedral felt like breathing for the first time in months, and when checks were calculated, land value returned, punitive damages from the HOA's insurance, that ridiculous odor fine voided like it never existed. I didn't think of numbers. I thought of ovens because mine had gone cold for 3 weeks during the worst of it, and I was scared of what that said about me. But the first batch back out tasted different, tasted like free, and I used part of the money to hire 2 teens from the neighborhood and upgrade equipment. And the rest I put into something you can't itemize a community spine. Here's the twist. Nobody asked for, and everybody needed 2 weeks after the criminal plea. A man in his 60s pulled up in a tired Civic with a bottle of maple syrup. He introduced himself as Robbie Margot's ex, and you can judge me for letting him in. But there was a tiredness about him that read like honesty. He told me Margot found a geological survey from the 70s, convinced herself there was oil under my land, convinced herself I was sitting on a jackpot, and she burned her life down, trying to steal a fantasy. Modern survey said no colleague said no, he said no, but greed is a frequency. You can't talk over when someone's tuned to it, and everything suddenly made a twisted kind of sense. The water line, the 3 feet, the obsession with my fence line, as if beneath it was a spigot to a secret she didn't want to share. Only there was no secret, just land with good soil and neighbors who wanted to be left alone. The new family who bought her house at a court-ordered sale, 3 kids, a dog that can't stop smiling, tore down the illegal fence first thing. And one afternoon, the youngest carried me a basket of clay cookies from art class, painted crooked and perfect. And I swear to you, I almost cried into my apron because a line that once marked theft now marks a swing set. And if that isn't justice, then maybe I don't understand the word. Ruth teaches apple turnovers to young moms on Saturdays. Now, Maya started a practice focused on HOA abuse because sometimes you find your purpose standing between a bully and a neighbor. The interim board reversed 5 years of ridiculous fines and asked me to serve as a community advisor, and I told them as kindly as I could that the day I sit through a bylaws meeting is the day my sourdough forgets how to rise. So they put Maya on retainer, and I show up where it counts with a box of warm loaves and a willingness to listen more than I talk. Not everyone is happy. There's always a Dennis in the crowd asking if we went too far, if maybe government should have kept its nose out. And that's the part I didn't expect, the way justice, when it finally lands, still makes some people itch, like they miss the predictability of a bad system. because at least they knew the rules of losing. But we keep talking, keep disagreeing. Like adults, keep remembering that the goal isn't to win Facebook. It's to keep kids safe, to ride bikes on a street that doesn't judge them for existing. Most mornings, I unlock the bakery while the sky is still choosing a color, and I watch the garden where a garage used to be, kids planting seeds where lies once rooted, flower in the air, soil under fingernails, laughter you don't have to ask permission for. And I think about something my grandfather told me when he taught me to plane wood. Build the foundation square and the trim will forgive your mistakes. And maybe that's all we did here. Maybe we squared the foundation of a little place called Redwood Crest so the fancy stuff could stop pretending to hold the walls up. They fined me for the smell of bread, and in the end, it was the smell of bread that brought my neighbors into one yard to see what was being done to all of us. And if you want to carve a moral out of that, go ahead. But I'll offer this. Fighting is loud and messy and sometimes necessary. Standing your ground is quiet and stubborn and often enough. And the line you choose when the envelope arrives might be the line your whole street ends up standing on. So tell me, what does justice look like where you live? Is it a courtroom with oak paneling and a gavel, or a folding table with a cheap speaker and the truth pouring out anyway? Have you ever had to plant your feet and say no when a reasonable yes would have been cheaper? You know what I mean? Drop your take below. What's fair? What's overreach? Where's the line between community standards and control if the story hit a nerve? Share it with someone who needs a little courage, baked into their day. And if you're hungry, I've got a dozen reasons, cooling on the rack, to believe we can still feed each other something better than fear.